1348, Florence. The streets are wrong. That's the first thing you'd notice, the silence where there should be noise. No haggling from market stalls, no cartwheels on cobblestone, just nothing. Doors nailed shut from the outside, crosses painted in white lime. And that smell, God, the smell. It gets into everything. It soaks into your clothes, your hair, the walls themselves. Sweet and thick and wrong. The bells never stop. They ring for the dead, and the dead keep coming, so the bells keep ringing. After a while, you stop hearing them. They become part of the silence. And then, through the fog, you see him. He moves like he's got all the time in the world. Long black coat dragging at his ankles, a cane in one gloved hand. And that face, except it's not a face, it's a beak. Long, curved, pointing forward like some kind of terrible bird. Glass circles where the eyes should be. He doesn't hurry, doesn't hesitate. He walks straight toward a plague house, one of the sealed ones, the ones nobody comes back from, and he goes inside. This is a plague doctor. And here's the thing nobody talks about anymore. Some of these men survived. Not all of them, maybe not even most, but some. They walked into rooms where death was a certainty. They examined bodies covered in black swellings. They breathed the same air as the dying. And then they walked out, day after day, week after week. Some of them worked through multiple outbreaks across multiple cities. How? That's what this is really about. Not the creepy mask, not the medieval horror aesthetic, the survival. How did anyone walk into that kind of death and come out breathing? This story happened 7 centuries ago, but the question it raises hasn't gone away. If you're the kind of person who wants to understand how humans actually survived moments like this, not the myths, not the drama, just the reality, consider subscribing and liking the video. It helps this kind of long-form research keep going. Now, back to the question. What made the difference between living and dying? Here's what you need to understand about treating plague patients in the 14th century. It was essentially a death sentence. Doctors didn't know what caused disease. Germ theory wouldn't exist for another 500 years. The leading medical explanation was miasma, bad air, corrupted atmosphere, foul smells that somehow carried sickness into the body. They were wrong about the mechanism, almost completely wrong. But they weren't stupid, and some of their responses, for reasons they couldn't possibly have understood, actually helped. The people who got close to plague victims died fast. Priests giving last rites, nuns washing the sick, family members who wouldn't leave their loved ones alone. They died in waves. The disease moved so quickly that a person could be perfectly healthy at breakfast and dead before sunset. Fever, then swelling hard black lumps in the groin, the armpits, the neck. Then the skin would darken, blood pooling beneath the surface. The body just gave up. Anyone treating these patients had nothing. No antibiotics, no understanding of bacteria, no protective equipment in any modern sense. Just their hands, their presence, and medical theories that were basically useless. And yet, some doctors kept showing up in the records, year after year, outbreak after outbreak, still alive, still working. Something was different about them. The plague doctor mask has become a kind of cultural shorthand. You see it in movies, video games, Halloween stores. It looks theatrical, almost ridiculous when you think about it. A giant beak attached to a hood, glass eyepieces, like a costume designed to terrify. Most people assume that's what it was, a scary uniform, a symbol, maybe something superstitious, medieval people doing medieval things. That assumption is completely wrong. The mask wasn't designed to frighten anyone. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't about intimidation or mystique. The plague doctor mask was a survival tool. An early, desperate, imperfect attempt to keep the wearer alive long enough to do his job. The beak wasn't decoration, it was functional. Doctors packed it with aromatic materials, dried flowers, herbs, camphor, cloves, rose petals, sometimes vinegar-soaked sponges. They believed these substances would purify the air before it reached their lungs. The theory behind it was wrong, completely wrong, but the effect wasn't entirely useless. Think about what the beak actually did. It created distance, 6-8 inches of physical space between the doctor's nose and mouth and whatever he was breathing in. It forced air to pass through a filter of organic material before reaching his airways. Did it stop plague bacteria? No. Yersinia pestis doesn't care about lavender. But survival isn't about perfect protection. It's about shifting odds. Every time a doctor leaned over a patient, he was rolling dice. The mask didn't change the game. It just tilted the odds slightly, maybe very slightly, in his favor. And when you're rolling those dice dozens of times a day after day, even a small tilt matters. But here's the thing. The mask was just one piece. The full plague doctor outfit was a complete system, crude by modern standards, probably laughable to anyone trained in infectious disease today. But for the 14th century, it represented something genuinely remarkable, a systematic attempt to cover the entire body and minimize exposure. The long coat was made of heavy fabric, often waxed or coated with suet or some other substance that repelled moisture. Bodily fluids, blood, vomit, pus from burst buboes couldn't soak through as easily. The coat went down to the ankles. Almost nothing was exposed. Gloves covered the hands, sometimes leather, sometimes coated with the same waxy substance. The goal was simple: no skin touching patients, no direct contact with anything contaminated. The cane was clever. Doctors used it to examine patients without getting close. They could lift clothing, point to swellings, even take a pulse by pressing the tip against a wrist instead of using their own fingers. Distance, always distance. The glass eyepieces protected against splashes. The hood and high collar meant almost no skin was exposed to open air. Was this modern PPE? Obviously not. It wouldn't pass any safety standard we have today, but it was a full-body protective system, maybe one of the first in human history, designed with a single purpose: keep the person inside, alive. And those who wore it correctly had better odds than those who didn't. But here's what really made the difference. More than the mask, more than the coat, more than any of the equipment: behavior. The doctors who survived weren't the bravest ones. They weren't the ones who sat at bedsides through the night, holding hands, offering comfort. Those doctors died. Compassion killed them. The survivors were disciplined. They entered a plague house, did what needed to be done, and left. They didn't linger. They understood, maybe instinctively, maybe through hard experience, that time in an infected space was time spent dying. Every extra minute increased the risk. They limited exposure. They followed routines. They washed their equipment. They changed their clothes. They avoided touching their own faces. They kept distance when they could. This wasn't courage in the romantic sense. It was calculation. Cold, deliberate, relentless calculation. Treat survival as a discipline. Follow the protocol. Don't let emotion override judgment. The ones who survived understood that every infected person was a hazard, not a neighbor, not a friend, a hazard, and they acted accordingly. The historical records back this up. City governments across Europe hired plague doctors under formal contracts. These weren't informal arrangements, they were legal documents specifying duties, payment, and behavior. Venice, Milan, Florence. Plague doctors were expected to visit the sick, record deaths, advise on quarantine, examine bodies. Notice what's not on that list. Cure anyone. Nobody expected cures. That wasn't the job. The job was information and management. Track the dead, identify infected households, help contain the spread. Some contracts required plague doctors to stay away from the healthy population entirely. Separate housing, designated routes through the city. They couldn't mingle with ordinary citizens when they weren't working. This wasn't punishment, it was acknowledgement. Anyone who touched the sick became a potential carrier. Quarantine laws emerged from this period. Ships waiting offshore for 40 days. Houses sealed and marked. Bodies buried outside city walls by designated workers who lived apart from everyone else. The plague doctor was a functionary in this early public health system. And within that system, survival depended on following protocol. Not on heroism, not on genius, on compliance, on discipline. On doing the same careful things, the same careful way, over and over again. There's something uncomfortable in all of this. The doctors who survived weren't gentle. They didn't offer comfort the way we'd want. They kept their distance emotionally and physically. They saw patients as threats, not as people to be saved. This emotional separation was necessary. The disease didn't care about intentions. It didn't distinguish between compassion and carelessness. Both brought exposure, both killed. Survival during the Black Death required a kind of coldness that's hard to admire. It required walking away, accepting that some people couldn't be saved, and that trying to save them would only add to the body count. This wasn't cruelty. It was triage on a civilizational scale. The doctors who internalized that logic, who made peace with it, were the ones who kept breathing. The mask didn't cure the plague. Nothing cured the plague. Tens of millions died, no matter what anyone did. Villages disappeared entirely. Cities lost half their populations. The disease came back in waves for centuries. The last major European outbreak wasn't until the late 1600s. But the mask represented something important, an idea that would eventually become central to medicine, to public health, to how humans respond to invisible threats. The idea that behavior could be structured to reduce risk, that protective equipment, even primitive, imperfect equipment, offered some advantage over nothing, that survival wasn't purely luck. The plague doctor didn't defeat death. He delayed it, bought time, for himself, for the cities that hired him, for patients who might recover if they got a few more days. Time wasn't a cure, but in an age without answers, time was the only medicine that mattered, and the mask was a tool for buying it. When you see that mask today in a museum, in a movie, on a costume rack, don't see medieval superstition. Don't see theater or horror. See survival. See the earliest attempt by human beings to face an invisible killer and develop systems flawed, desperate, sometimes futile, that gave them a chance. The mask wasn't a costume. It was a decision. Some who made that decision died anyway. The odds were still terrible, but some walked out of the houses of the dead and kept walking, day after day, through empty streets, into rooms thick with disease, and back out into the fading light. They survived not because they were fearless. They survived because they were careful. And in the mathematics of plague, careful was sometimes enough.